One of the things that I think lately we cannot avoid is the news. The news is everywhere and it's on everything. Doesn't matter whether it's your phone, whether it's what you're seeing in public. I mean, you're constantly being blasted by headlines. It's very all consuming concepts, very all consuming activity. It's a very big part of our daily lives. And I think it's one of the things that shapes us in a strange way. Like in many ways, a lot of who we are lately is really shaped by the news because it's really forcing us to confront ideas. It's provoking long running thoughts. It's bringing us to a new sense of being. So the pivotal nature of news, I think, has only grown. And I think for that reason, I thought it would be really fascinating to explore this as a topic. News itself as a concept has changed a lot. What news is, where do you get news has changed a lot. Who is reporting the news has also changed a lot. So this and many other things are one of the things I wanted to really explore with my friend Chris, who I've known for quite some time to be someone that not just generates the news and generates that understanding, but also provides a very unique and nuanced perspective on the news. And I thought it would be really interesting to ask him his opinion on all of these things and really understanding where news is at today. So this episode, which is kind of split into two parts, really focuses on that. The first part is sort of talking about that evolution of the news. The second part speaks a little bit more to where we're hoping news will go and what news will become. So I'm very, very fascinated by this topic, and I'm really excited to share it with all of you. The insights in this episode are really something special, and I'm utmostly thankful to Chris for agreeing to do this, being open, transparent, honest with me about everything that relates to his daily life. So thanks again, Chris, and get excited for this episode. It's a good one. Hello, hello. How are you?
Hello, Kareem. I'm doing great, thank you. How are you doing?
Mm-hmm. Good, Kareem. I feel like I'm in my home, like
Yeah.
when my mom calls me for doing something really bad in the house, she's always like, she comes in with this Kareem, and I'm like, oh, what now? Uh,
Yeah, I'm reprimanding you. This is
yeah.
you're being grounded.
I mean, I deserve it. I'm probably doing too much and a lot, and I'm hyper problematic as it is. So, I'm not doing anyone any favors. But thank you again for doing this. This is really, really good to finally get to talk to you and to have a little bit of a conversation about something that you actively do on a day-to-day basis, which is really exciting for me. It's also something that I've been thinking way too much about
Mhm.
because it's all around us in every realm, and it's impacting everything we do. So, talking about it with you, I think would be really, really ideal. Yeah, I think it's nice that we get to talk. But before we get to talk, I think it would be really nice to introduce who you are, so people that follow me know exactly who Chris is. Because I know Chris, the world does not know Chris. So please introduce yourself. Who are you? What do you do?
Okay. My name is Chris Hanna. I work
Hmm.
in journalism in Canada. I've been a writer, reporter, editor for about 14 years now, working at different outlets across the country, in Montreal and Toronto. That's the breadth of the country. That's it. It's Montreal and Toronto. But I started my career in Montreal working at the daily newspaper there, and
Hmm.
I'm now at a digital website based out of Toronto currently. I've been doing
Hmm.
this job for 6 years. Um, I work with writers in house and freelancers, and we cover subjects as varied as the Blue Jays playoff run happening
Yep,
currently,
yep,
as
yep.
well as um, Canadian connections to Gaza,
Hmm.
politics, news, cost of living, grocery prices, anything that could be on the internet is something that's interesting to us. Anything sort of making an impact on
Hmm.
Canadians' day-to-day lives, we try to cover that as best we could.
No, it's really, really impressive and really important to talk specifically to a Canadian reporter in this world today, because it's a very different world in many ways for Canadian reporting, perhaps even from when you started. your career? I know that there's been like some big shifts that have gone there. But before we get to that, I was very curious. What got you started in journalism? Like, why did why were you like, hey, I want to actually get into journalism. I want to actually make this the focus of
Mm.
my work, the focus of my life in many ways.
Like the shortest answer is
Mm.
I'm a know-it-all and
Hmm.
kind of want to.
Yeah.
Well, I was
Yeah.
like, what is a job where being a know-it-all is advantageous?
Yep.
And honestly, I was met pretty quickly with the notion that actually being a know-it-all in this industry is not the way to do it. And so
Yeah.
I'm glad I was checked pretty quickly that actually you should basically pretend like you know nothing. And that has been like the most useful career advice I ever
Right.
got.
Right.
I often cover or read things that I'm already pretty well versed in or already enjoy, or already have some sort of knowledge about. And
Hmm.
I think for some folks that could mean that it's making you a little bit less curious, that you're asking fewer
Mm.
questions. But it actually did the opposite for me. I just kind of became hyper interested in information, period.
Right.
And the more I knew about something, and this
Hmm.
is true, I think I'm botching this as an expression, but the more you know about something, the more you realize you actually know nothing. And the same is true too. I mean, we have a writer now covering the Blue Jays for us, and I've never really covered sports on a daily
Hmm.
basis like this. And it's been really exciting to for me to explore that
Hmm.
as a editor, as an editor and writer and sort of producer of news,
Hmm.
to sort of ask questions that maybe people don't always ask because they're so in it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I feel like that's I don't know, not to call myself an outsider in journalism, but at least an outsider in like daily, again, to use this example, Blue Jays coverage. I'm like,
Hmm.
tell me more. Like, I want to know more
Hmm.
about something specific. So that sort of know it all attitude went out the window pretty quick. And I just kind of became really interested in education and information gathering and
Hmm.
fact checking and sort of the health of our democracy. I think journalism is a really important part of a well functioning democracy. Now, whether we are a well functioning democracy, I think is like a whole other topic.
Yeah.
But I think if we pretended that we were for the purpose of this conversation, I
Hmm.
think journalism is that people's voice. I still
Hmm.
very much believe in that. We should be um, asking questions that maybe people don't want to answer. We should be asking people in power, folks who control the purses,
Hmm.
where our money's going, what they're doing with it, how it impacts day to day life here. We should know about our history, how that affects our future and present.
Yes. Hmm.
And those are all things that I honestly I'm this is a sort of funny segue, but I'm a big movie watcher too. And I always say like the really fun part of watching movies is you're never done. There's always
Exactly.
something new or honestly
Mm.
something old that you've yet
Hmm.
to uncover. And that's how
Hmm.
I feel about information and journalism in general is
Yeah.
like the work is never done. You're
No.
never fully versed in any topic. And
No.
uh, the closer we all get to that sort of epiphany, the more we realize like actually it's all our jobs to make sure the information we consume and share is clean and
Hmm.
right and
Hmm.
good.
No, exactly that. And I love, love, love that curiosity is the main driver, of what it is you try to get
Hmm.
into and what you still do right now. And curiosity also drives and pushes you away from maybe even that norm that you maybe are settling into because it makes it dynamic for you every single time, which is what it should be because the world is dynamic. Everything is constantly changing and thought should be changing in the same way. I also really like that comparison to, film and the power of film because I think we talk a lot about the fact that movies are a reflection of the times, and that has to be their ability. A lot of the times is to kind of really give you that perspective, that alternate view into something that maybe you've seen maybe multiple times, and now you're like, oh wait, this is a different take to something that I've been used to. I was also curious between now and when you started. Journalism has changed pretty drastically. I feel like journalism is still changing. It's a constantly evolving job, right? Like I think of, for example, like, just about a week ago when all those reporters moved out of the Pentagon itself and now
Hmm.
report from outside the Pentagon rather than from within the Pentagon. That's a big shift in reporting itself because what you're now getting access to is all the more different. How has journalism changed from when you started your job?
Yeah, I mean, I think just dwindling numbers. I mean, being a journalist is just a little more rare these days,
Hmm.
and what that means and what kind of journalism people are practicing, I think, is
Hmm.
changing day to day.
Hmm.
What readers' perception and expectation from journalism is also changing,
Hmm.
and where readers get information is changing as well. So we're no longer the sole source. I mean, to be fair, we rarely were the sole source for information, but now we're
Right.
competing for eyeballs and attention with things like AI tools and
Hmm.
chatbots, and of course, always television, radio,
Hmm.
podcasting. Bloggers, all of this. There's so many more avenues where people get information.
Yeah.
Um, when I started my career, I worked at a newspaper. I was working late nights to update
Hmm.
sort of like the final scores of
Hmm.
sports games that were happening on the West Coast. And that job doesn't exist anymore.
Hmm.
I mean, just
Hmm.
straight up, that is
Yep.
not a job
A
people
thing.
do anymore. This was 2009. I mean, it just doesn't
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
And a lot of jobs that I've done in the past sort of no longer exist. I think,
Hmm.
not to be a fossil about it, but even if we're not looking at newspapers, up until 2 years ago, I was
Yeah.
a social media manager for my current employer, and
Yeah.
with the meta ban in Canada, that means that news publishers aren't
Mm.
allowed to publish on um, Meta owned
Correct.
social media, so Facebook and Instagram. That was, 75% of my job at that
Hmm.
point. So I had to shift pretty quickly in realizing, I mean, this is a gift too. I mean, my journalism training helps me in almost every aspect of my life, but especially in my career, where
Hmm.
if you apply the lens of information gathering,
Hmm.
information curation, making things digestible to readers, you can, finagle your way into a position pretty
Hmm.
comfortably, and
Hmm.
I've been pretty lucky in that sense.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting that you've talked a little bit and you've touched a little bit about that shifting dynamic between consumer of news and producer of news. I
Mhm.
think like I remember growing up, I was so reliant on singular sources of news, right? I had like maybe CNN going or maybe BBC at that time. And those were my primary avenues to getting like international news. And whatever newspaper was in my house was like my, insight into local news at that particular point in time. But because those were my singular sources, a lot of times my view, especially on things, tended to be very linear. And I think one of the things that changed for me, obviously, as the internet grew, is that ability that there are broader sources. There are multiple avenues to getting news. And that means that you have different perspectives, but that also means you have different, you know, um, ideas of what news should be applied to you. And then you have to kind of objectively go through that. But I don't think everyone has that ability, right? When it comes to how that has changed for you now, because you are using multi channels to sort of reach an audience, does that really impact you in terms of how you go about producing news or the type of news that you're producing?
Yeah, sometimes competing ideas for news too, right?
Yeah.
There's one topic. If you gave it to sort of four different reporters, they would
Hmm.
come back with four different stories. And I think
Hmm.
something like that is really beautiful.
Yeah.
The current organization I work for is more known as a news aggregator, and so we have
Hmm.
access to a lot more variety of story. And so sometimes it involves looking at the same story from different countries, even, and different languages, to see what the most appropriate avenue is. And that also takes a little bit of a sort of instinct,
Yeah.
sort of training to figure out, um, what do I know about this? What don't I know about this? And what is important to know about this? So I think it for sure impacts all of that. And I think, one of the most obvious ways that sort of real world technologies have impacted the way we work is not
Hmm.
just the physical operation. I mean, I don't work at a newspaper anymore, but newspapers used to be, some still are, a daily operation. And so you
Mhm.
got your news at your doorstep in the morning, and maybe you read it on the way to work or before work at breakfast, and that was kind of it. And now you have 24/7 access to information. And
Yeah.
is that always great? I am sort of on the side of no. I don't think that's always great.
Mhm. Mhm.
It is a really big pressure to constantly be churning something out. And I think we've seen many examples, certainly lately, of the cacophony of
Mhm.
information.
Mhm.
Sometimes too much is too
Too
much.
much.
And so you have to learn
Yeah.
to edit, of course, in
Mm.
the simplest terms, just edit.
Yep.
But as a consumer as well, I think it's your responsibility to sort of diversify your news diet in
Mhm.
a way that is, I mean, just to keep on the diet paradigm here, but like in a way that is like healthy and sustainable for you. We
Mhm.
all love junk food, but if we're
Mhm.
only eating junk food, there's going to be an impact on your health later.
100%.
Um, and this isn't to say I don't like junk food. I do very much. But we are talking about the health of our democracy. And I think at a time like this, certainly in the last, I say 6 years, when there's just too much information to say with a straight face that you didn't know about something. Um, I wanted to touch on something you brought up briefly, which is
Mm.
the local news angle.
Yep.
I think those are some of the most important journalistic endeavors.
Mhm.
And we are seeing with corporate ownership of newspapers and media outlets that some of the small towns, we're lucky we
Mhm.
live in Toronto. I used to work out of Montreal, where there are many different outlets and
Right.
many more journalists covering the cities day to day.
Mhm.
But there are some smaller cities that have one news outlet. And
Right.
sometimes those get folded into another or just, folded
Mhm.
completely. And there are many towns that don't have coverage of local stories, local politics, local elections, municipal affairs. I mean, these are public dollars,
Mhm.
stories revolving around public dollars that there's just no public record of.
Yeah.
So I feel for small towns that don't have that. I mean, kind of funny timing. We're talking when the show The Paper, the sort of Dunder Mifflin
Yeah.
offshoot, is out, and I watched a few episodes, and some of it would like kind of hurt my heart. Some of it kind of hurt my heart because it hit close to home, and it was
Yeah.
very funny, and
Yeah.
but touches quite
A
intimately
lot.
on a very serious topic as well, which is the sort of these invisible stories that people aren't talking about, and
Mhm.
um, the sort of
Yeah.
extreme need to meet somewhere in the middle. It's like
Yeah.
we can we change reader habits, and also can we change the news
Mhm.
gathering habit of media orgs. So I don't know. I know it's supposed to be funny, but like from an anthropological point of view, I was like, wait, this is saying a lot about this business.
It is because you know what? I one of the things that really caught me when I watched many episodes of that, I watched that show a lot, but one of the things that really caught me is the fact that there is a sense of empowerment when you are able to report about a local
Hmm.
populace and what it does for that population of people. And I think that that is the power of the news because it gives that sense of visibility. It makes everyone feel seen. And I think right now we live in a world where we are feeling very much less in our power. And a lot of that has to do with how the news also views us. Because if you are not seen in your local context as a matter of concern, it means that then you are insignificant. Therefore, your focus also then becomes everything that is beyond you, right? Everything that is outside of you. But the reality is that in order to effectuate any change in everything that is outside of you, it has to start locally. It has to start within that community that you've already got, right? And I think that that is a very interesting shift for me in that perspective for news organizations, just because news organizations are just driven by money, just like everything else society in our capitalist society. But I think what needs to end up happening, and this is the power of media as a whole, is that it needs to really be completely contextual. It needs to be representative at every level. Everyone needs to feel seen by what it is they're looking at in the news. And that doesn't mean that, you're just consuming international news all the time or news of the broader country. It means that you're consuming local news. You know
Mhm.
what's going on around you. And that's also engaging, right? And I really, really feel that, the internet is a double-edged sword in many ways. It takes away a lot of focus from that, but I think it also brings in this opportunity for a lot
Yeah.
of, TikTok reporters, for example, to come in and be like, we're now covering what's happening in Toronto. And I know
Yeah.
you're cringing. I know you're
Yeah.
cringing.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about this, but this is actually a really good segue into my follow-up question. So here's my follow-up question, really
Well, wait,
related to
I
this.
have a little
Cool.
comment before we move
Okay,
on
do
because
it,
there's
do it.
something really interesting. I mean, we talk about community. We talk about community. Only some of it is geographic. Some of a
Mm,
lot of other community is not. And so I think of very specialized outlets that cover, for instance, LGBTQ issues, or
mm-hmm,
when I was growing up, my parents and grandparents were getting an Arabic newspaper at the grocery
mm-hmm,
store we went to every week, and so
mm-hmm,
it was really interesting that this idea that you were sharing of feeling unseen, that like your stories
mm-hmm,
aren't being reported. And it's not that this Arabic newspaper was, storming City Hall for secrets about, what's happening at Montreal City Hall. It's that it
mm-hmm,
was covering important people in the diaspora, the Arabic community in
mm-hmm,
Montreal. So there was something really interesting about, growing up in that environment, that there was a value put on information about your people. There was
yeah,
value put on journalism and supporting your people,
mm-hmm,
and also sharing your story. And as we see now, oral histories are great, and
everything. It's
written ones
everything.
are honestly even better. Not to pin them against each other, but there's a record of things. That's
Right.
very hard to deny an
Mm-hmm,
existence of when it's literally right there, right? So,
mm-hmm,
and touching on that a little bit more, I think there's in many cultures, there's journalism has a sort of very hard power,
mm-hmm,
and in some others, journalism and culture and art in general has a very soft
mm-hmm,
power. And I feel very encouraged by the moment we're in now of people realizing that, and realizing that while representation isn't the be all end all, it does go a long way, and also
mm-hmm.
educating others about your
Yep.
community. And you know not to be dark, but I think of how many parents sort of discourage. I grew
Mm-hmm,
up in a very Arab household.
mm-hmm,
My family is from Syria. We're been here since the mid 70s, and I think of how many parents have sort of discouraged their
mm-hmm.
children from pursuing the arts or something
Yeah.
creative, and now we're kind of seeing this new generation opening themselves up to
Mm-hmm,
that idea a little bit more, and seeing way more creators from Swana regions and MENA regions. And so I'm really encouraged about the idea that the next generation of, or honestly the current generation as well as the next generation of creators, writers,
mm-hmm,
publishers will have a much broader lens on who their audience is, who
mm-hmm,
they serve,
mm-hmm,
and what it means, the responsibility of what it means to be a news person. I'll just use that term sort of very vaguely, but it encompasses everything. I mean, it's media publishing, it's art creating, it's all that. And I mean, to have to make this point in 2025 is insane to me, because our people are, thinkers and poets and lovers
yeah.
and artists, and they have been for centuries. And so
Mm-hmm,
we're we're finally sort of in a place where we can acknowledge that, and we have a very long history of the written and oral
history.
tradition,
Yep.
um, to know that like we've always belonged, we always do our own thing, and we always get by.
No, you're absolutely right. I think in many ways, those are the receipts, in many ways for the future to
Hmm.
say that this actually did happen, right?
Hmm.
In this particular way. Oral history itself, I think, is something it's a whole discussion on its own that we can have, because I think a lot of, everything that is religion also is in oral history, but, it still maintains its power today the way that it did before, even though it's been interpreted 9,000 different ways. But the thing that matters for me is that when you do have something documented, especially in the media, it really makes it affirms it. It affirms it in a way that you could easily say, history is not being questioned here because there is tangible, visible representation of that moment. Like, I used to live in a house that was really, really old. This is like a very big sidetrack, but anyway, we'll get to this point, but it's a cool story. But I used to live in a house. I thought I was being haunted by this woman every day. And I kept trying to get my roommates to understand that, I think we have a haunting in our midst.
Right.
I would go into corners of the house and it would smell like a woman's perfume. And I'm like, someone has a spirit in here. So we decided to investigate, right, further. And I remember going to Toronto Archives. And when you go into Toronto Archives, there's like all of these tools that you can use that can, go back in time. And you can see old newspaper clippings, for example, from back in the day. And that's kind of how we discovered that somebody was murdered in our house. And the body is actually buried underneath the house. So the newspaper clippings kind of like, we felt very much just like Ghost Rider, or like,
Mm.
literally any mystery show where we're like, it's in the news. But it was also really, impactful for me to see that,
Yeah,
yes, there is a written history of a local story, right? Of a murder that actually kind of gives me an explanation now in 2019 of what's going
absolutely.
on in my space, right? I'm obviously not gaslighting myself. This house is haunted, right? But
And
that is the
what a
power.
beautiful example of that,
Yeah.
because that exactly it. It's an
Yeah.
example of what happened here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
You're
there's
totally
so many instances, I think, of what happened here that we just don't have, right? Or we have a very inaccurate look at. And so,
mm-hmm.
um, I mean, again, not the elephant in the room, or let's not beat around the bush, but there's a very well documented genocide
Yeah.
happening currently. And I
Yep.
think certainly in the last 2 years, but at least for the last four, um, people are waking up to the idea that information can come from places that are, let's say, not
Mm-hmm.
traditional.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have these documented instances of killings, brutality,
Mm-hmm.
murder, as well as very joyous
Mm-hmm.
occasions
Moments.
of celebration, um, I think it just reaffirms the idea that, to tell a story is to sort of cement somebody's existence.
Mm-hmm. It is that. And I think, we live in an era like right now where news is decentralized, right? Like, that's what
Hmm.
social media and any kind of like online media did, is that it broke apart where news comes from. But obviously you're able to find truths in visual, representation, or in, audio representation of what's going on. If you actually are going out there to look for it, right? And I personally feel like the internet is forever. Like, I tell people all the time, I'm like, anything you've put up, someone has made multiple copies of it already, which is one of the greatest things about it, because
Yeah.
I feel like that's what like. You would not question now, 20, 30 years down the line, that a genocide has happened, because there is so much evidence around it, right? There is all of these sources, and the internet is really, really good at preserving that, right? It's not going to, I know we're also living in an age of AI where maybe a lot of things could be made up, but that's not necessarily the case when it comes to something of this sort, where it's coming from that many sources, right? And I think that is truly the power. Like I said, the internet is genuinely a double-edged sword. Something I really was wondering about is, as you're writing, especially in a context, for example, like you're writing about the genocide, or maybe something genocide related, how important is it for you to remain objective in your view? It's really hard personally for me to talk about anything related to it and obviously not be, emotional about it, or to
Yeah.
get really, riled up about it, and really feel like there's an offense, to everything that's happening.
Mm.
How important is it that you look at something and you're like, I'm going to report this in an objective manner? Or do you tend to remain neutral? How do you navigate that entire experience?
This is a really big question, a sort of existential question, even for
Mm-hmm.
journalism and reporters in general. I
Mm-hmm.
think we have to differentiate between objective and partisan. Partisan is a sort of belonging to a party or group of people or set of thoughts that will um, not just cloud your thinking of something, but affect the writing of it as well. Whereas objective, I think for me anyway, means, you can realize perhaps you have a bias on X subject,
Hmm.
but how do you bring that in to make sure that you are properly contextualizing
Hmm.
every sort of blind spot you might have? This is where that sort of information curation comes in. I mean, because what is a journalist if not an information curator, right? So you sort of make a judgment call on what is important to the
Hmm.
story, not what you deem important to the story.
Right.
And this isn't really about both siding a
Hmm.
story, although some people don't even both sides genocide. I mean, it is a
Yeah.
little wild.
Yeah.
But it is about making sure you're um, covering every possible angle,
Hmm.
turning over every stone.
Hmm.
Things you might personally disagree with shouldn't get in the
Hmm.
way of your professional duty.
Right.
And I say duty not in a daunting way, but you know, it is a duty. I mean, it is a
Yeah.
privilege to be able
Yep.
to be a source of information for folks in this day and age when a lot of information is questionable.
Hmm.
And you have a duty to report fairly, and you have a duty to just do that is the job. There's a old quote, and now I'm going to mess it up because I'm on the spot. An old journalism instructor, and he didn't make this up, to be
Hmm.
clear. Uh, but we're supposed to hang on. I'm going to look this up because I don't want
Do it.
to get
Do
it
it.
wrong.
Get it. Hmm.
Because I'm supposed to know this. This is kind of like the um
Don't worry, I put a marker. So take
okay.
your time.
It's a really good one too. Okay, I got it.
Hmm.
Are we back? Okay. So there's a journalism instructor of mine who, and he didn't make this up to be
Hmm.
clear, but he shared this quote with us, and it is sort of the um, motto, I would say, of
Hmm.
journalism, which is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And so when you look at things from that lens, I think it's very easy to understand that you're not going to write a story that doesn't cover both things. But if your guiding line is, again, to comfort the afflicted, like it should be, because journalism is the people's voice, um, that covering something like a genocide shouldn't involve things like quoting an army, quoting the police, quoting a prime minister
Hmm.
exclusively. So even by some people's measures of
Hmm.
objectivity, if you are both siding it, most people think that, according to the IDF or Israel said, is journalism enough, and that's simply
Hmm.
not true.
Hmm.
I say this to single out
Yeah.
the people who are enacting this genocide, but this is true of everything. I mean, a crime
Hmm.
story that happens in the city, you wouldn't say like this happened according to police. It's like you have
Correct.
to go a second
Yep.
level there. You wouldn't say,
Yep.
the prime minister said this and you take it at face value. There's not to be a hater. There's not to be a know-it-all. There's not to be a Debbie Downer. It's just like, let me check. Let me
Right.
check to make sure,
Right.
you know? And it doesn't make you partisan. It doesn't make you not
Hmm.
objective. It makes you are doing your job. There's another quote
Hmm.
of like, if one person says it's raining and the other person says it's not raining, your job isn't to write both of those things. Your job is to
Right.
go outside and check for
And
yourself.
check.
So again, information curation, one of the most important jobs of a journalist, you have to do that.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, especially in an era where everything is so curated for us, that you would actually say that there is a need for curation in the news that you're consuming, right? But I think a lot of people take for granted what they consume. Like people look at a story and they just assume this is already distilled and condensed enough, and a perspective has been given to it that I can just consume and take that as a given, right? A lot of people will not do that investigative work to try to better understand or contextualize what it is they're reading. because for a lot of people, it's too much work, right? Or it's uncomfortable to discover new things about maybe things that you've seen, be part of your life this entire time. And like now you have to look at it in a new perspective and you're like, oh, wait, there are clearly big gaps here. One of the things I also think that drives a lot of this is money. And I think money really speaks to how news is reported.